watching with happy tears, of course, watching all the inaugural celebrations. So it's not my best work. I hope you guys enjoy this 8 slide presentation, and then there's plenty of time afterwards to do questions if we don't get to it. I do want to do a shameless plug while I'm pulling up this presentation, and the plug is I'm going to do salary surveys. And I want you all to engage with me in salary surveys and make use of them because it's going to be Palm Beach County and the nonprofit realm. And so I would like to ask everyone here that when we reach out, and I've got a math graduate who's going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting, if you could please give us all your data. And then in turn, as NLAP members, we'll give you as much data back as you want. So with that, let's get into what to know about the COVID vaccine in the workplace. Now, this is the topic of the month. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like ever since COVID has started, every month has been defined by a particular topic. Emergency planning, Family First Coronavirus Response Act, PPP loans, working remotely, accommodations. Every month it's a hot topic, and that's what it is today, is the COVID vaccine. And it's a good time to get talking about it because the vaccines aren't available to most people yet, but when they are, we don't want to be trying to play catch up. And I feel like a lot of the COVID stuff was a game of catch up for folks. Like we're just, this is a new rule, we have to follow it. Okay, now what do we do? So if we have this opportunity to kind of think and plan and develop ideas now, we'll be better off for it in the future. But before we get into can we mandate it, I want to take a stroll down memory lane with our old friend, the ADA. Now, we all know what the ADA is, the Americans with Disability Act, and at its heart, it's a civil rights act, right? It protects individuals with disabilities from adverse employment action. So an employer cannot discriminate against an employee based on a disability or a perceived disability. We know the catchy words that go along with ADA. When an employee comes to us and requests an accommodation, we as employers have to consider all reasonable accommodations and grant them as long as they're not undue burdens or hardships, financial hardships. And those things are important. But why am I talking about the ADA as it relates to vaccines? Because the main legal restriction on requiring an employee to get a vaccine comes from the ADA. Now, there are strict provisions and restrictions on an employer's ability to require employees to get the vaccine because of something called the medical exam and disability related inquiries. You probably kind of already know what a disability related inquiry is because when you do interviews, for example, you already know that if someone comes in with a disability, you can't say, hey, I noticed you're in a wheelchair. Can you do some heavy lifting? No, we don't say that, right? What we can say is, based on the job description, are you able to perform the job duties as listed? We can't do disability related inquiries because that is at its heart discriminatory. So generally speaking, vaccines are not medical exams, and asking about vaccines are not disability related inquiries. How does that interact with the ADA? It comes down to pre-screen questions. Now, some of you are going to want to get all your employees vaccinated through a program internally. Some of you have those resources. Some of you may contract with somebody. This part of the presentation is for you. So when you're doing it in-house or contracting with an agency, so someone's coming in to do the vaccines at your request, there will be a series of pre-screen questions, right? I haven't been vaccinated in years personally. I know I should do the flu vaccine, but I seem to forget it each year. But if I recall, pre-screen questions related to vaccines are things like, do you have any allergies? Do you have any pre-existing conditions that might be exacerbated by the vaccine? These pre-screen questions are disability related inquiries, and that's a big red flag under the ADA. And that applies also to your contractor. Why does this make sense? Because the ADA is a civil rights act that protects people with disabilities or perceived disabilities. Knowing about these pre-screen questions triggers the umbrella that is the Americans with Disability Act. So if an employer administers the vaccine or contractor or agent or something does so on the employer's behalf, And there's a series of pre-screen questions. You need to make sure that those pre-screen questions are job related and consistent with business necessity. If you're requiring the vaccines, the employer has to show that the employee who refuses to answer those questions will pose a direct threat to health or safety of others before taking any adverse action. So what does that mean? If you're doing the vaccine, make sure that your questions are targeted for the job and it's for business necessity. And if people say, no, I'm not answering these pre-screen questions, and you take adverse action, you have to be able to show that you did that because it's a direct threat. No, that's kind of lofty. That's obnoxious. And most folks, yeah, Diana, I will give an example of a direct threat. Actually, most folks are not going to take that path. Most folks are not going to be doing it in-house or with a contractor. But there's two scenarios in which an employer can use those pre-screen questions without showing that they're job related or consistent with business necessity. So if you're under the umbrella of the Americans with Disability Act, as demonstrated by my hands right now, the two scenarios that remove you from that are that the employer can offer vaccinations on a voluntary basis, and the decision to answer those pre-screen questions are also voluntary. So in this scenario, you're no longer under the Americans with Disability Act. The only downside is that your employees aren't going to get a vaccine under that scenario. The other scenario is if the employer, that's you, mandates the vaccine. So we're under the umbrella because we're in-house doing the vaccine, we're with a contractor doing the vaccine, we have pre-screen questions, we're mandating the vaccine, but we remove the vaccine application from in-house and give it to a third party like CVS, Walgreens, Publix, MD Now, something like that, someone you do not have a contract with, the ADA umbrella disappears again. So if you take anything away from that very boring first slide, it's don't do vaccinations in-house or contract with an entity to do them on your behalf unless you're prepared to follow all these pre-screen requirements. But that second prong there, third-party vaccinator, which I think vaccinator is not really a word, but it sounds kind of like a superhero title, which I think folks in that realm probably are superheroes at this point. This means that, yes, you can mandate the vaccine as long as the employee receives the vaccine from a third-party pharmacy or medical provider, Dr. G's medical clinic or something with which you do not have a contract. So that answers that overarching question that everyone wants to know is, can I require it? Can I mandate it? Yes, you can. And we're going to talk about whether you should and what other considerations in just a minute. Now, you guys already know this also, but just to make sure we're covering all bases, what do you do with a group of people under the ADA? You make accommodations, right? So you can't just have a blanket on everything. We have accommodations, and there's two types of accommodations that we look for here. One is disability related accommodations. The other is going to be religious accommodations. So as we're strolling down memory lane with the ADA, we bring along a friend, another old friend, the EEOC. And remember, the EEOC offers us guidance, interprets kind of these civil rights laws so that we know that we're on the right path. And the EEOC tells us that if a vaccination requirement screens out or tends to screen out an individual with a disability, the employer must show that the unvaccinated individual would pose a direct threat. And I'm coming to the direct threat part, Diana. So a direct threat due to significant risk of substantial harm to the health and safety of themselves or others that cannot be reduced by reasonable accommodation. That is a long sentence with big words that means stuff though. So I'm going to break it down real quick just so we understand what we're talking about here. So direct threat, which we're going to talk about in a second, due to significant risk of substantial harm. It's not risk of harm, it's significant risk of substantial harm. Those are big. It has to be a lot, right? Significant and substantial is a lot more than just normal. That cannot be accommodated. I pose to you that there's very rare circumstances that you will have somebody who says that you cannot find an accommodation for the vaccine. So someone comes to you and says, I can't get the vaccine. It's a disability related accommodation. You give them the paperwork and you think to yourself, I don't know, that looks like a direct threat. to significant risk of substantial harm, I think I'm going to tell them cannot make the accommodation. Either get the vaccine or get out. I don't think so, because reasonable accommodation can reduce all those issues. And what are we looking at? The same stuff that we've been doing for the last 10 months. So somebody gives you a disability related accommodation. I can't get vaccinated. What accommodations can you think of? Continue wearing masks, social distancing, teleworking. And I know before anyone yells it out, there's a tendency to think, I want to get rid of telework. But in certain circumstances, you're probably not going to get rid of it completely. So that can remain as a reasonable accommodation in certain circumstances. So the EEO also says that an employer should not conduct, or an employer should conduct, an individualized assessment to determine whether or not a direct threat exists. So the factors were given, they're kind of, vague, as most things are that come out of the federal government. Duration of risk, nature and severity of potential harm, likelihood that the potential harm will occur, and imminence of potential harm. This is a totality of the circumstances kind of thing. We're not looking at one measurement over the other, but an all together. So someone comes in and says, I need an accommodation, a disability related accommodation. And you think, are they a direct threat? Will I grant this accommodation because it's not a direct threat? Will I not grant this accommodation? And you go through this list of factors, duration of harm. If the duration of harm, or duration of risk rather, is very short, this is only going to last, a day. The nature and severity of potential harm, there's no one else in the office, so there's very little severity of potential harm. Likelihood that potential harm will occur, again, no one's around. And imminence is going to happen well in the future. This is not a direct threat. Somebody who, let's say, comes into a nursing home and is a known carrier of the COVID virus, that may be a direct threat. Why? Because the duration of the risk is for the extended period that they're there. The potential for harm is great because you have a vulnerable population. The likelihood that will occur, well, with all the variants around, we know that it's very transmittable. And the imminence of potential harm, again, vulnerable population, a lot of categories probably being checked off why they're vulnerable. That might look more like a direct threat than the other scenario. So we take a look at all those things. Now, again, we accommodate where we can. So even if a direct threat exists, there's a difference between excluding someone from the workplace and terminating them. Sometimes an accommodation under the ADA is not going to be wear a mask. Sometimes it's going to be unpaid leave of absence. You can't get the vaccine and you can't use any of the other accommodations you've been offered. Well, you can take an unpaid leave of absence, or paid depending if they have the time off accrued. So exclusion for work and termination are not the same thing. And of course, telework is an option for many people these days. So don't forget that option as we're moving forward. As much as we want to go back to the old office style, telework has given us kind of a window as to what's possible for accommodations in the future. This is tea, hold on. Okay, now since disability related accommodations do fall under the ADA, a different provision than we talked about on the first slide, we still have to engage in that interactive process with people. So, is it a reasonable accommodation? Is there an undue hardship? And when we're thinking about whether it's an undue hardship, there's certain things to consider. How many employees are there? How many people are unvaccinated? What are the other options of accommodations? Good places to look besides kind of our bubble is the CDC or OSHA, because they've got it broken down into different categories as to, this work environment is suitable for this sort of accommodation. So check those places out if you come up with this problem. The other kind of accommodation we have to consider is the religious accommodation. So this one gets funny in just a second, hold on. So once an employer is on notice that an employee sincerely held belief, practice, or religious observation prevents the employee from getting the vaccine, then you must provide a reasonable accommodation. And this is under Title VII. And of course, unless it poses an undue hardship, again, that's kind of your catch-all to save the employer from doing it. Now, the tricky part is sometimes we don't believe people when they offer us their explanation. Out of nowhere, somebody says, actually, my religion prevents me from getting vaccines. And you go, wait a second, how does that even make sense? I've known you for years. You've never once indicated you had any sincerely held beliefs. Now, and so there's a tendency that we don't want to grant it at that point. I get that. I hear it. Courts routinely tell us, though, that employers should assume a request is based on a sincerely held belief and not the opposite. Anti-vaxxers, that's not a sincerely held religious belief. Nothing to do with religion most of the time. Sometimes people could be anti-vaxxers because of some religious interpretation, but most of the time not. They're just anti-vaxxers. Okay, so by show of hands, who wants to make it mandatory? A vaccine? Nobody? I don't know if I believe you guys because I get a lot of calls asking this question. So I'm pretty sure that several of you are supposed to be raising your hand right now. Okay, thanks, Owen.
We all want to raise our hand, but we're afraid to.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're not. I don't know if we have enough information to be informed on whether we want to do it or not. Part of me says yes, but I still need more information.
Well,
I didn't hesitate. I had my hand up right away. It's like completely mandatory. I don't see what the problem is.
Yes, let's talk about the problems, but I want your immediate feeling to come forward in this because this is a very emotional experience, I think, is trying to be like, I can't take it anymore. I want my employees back in the office. Everyone's getting the vaccine or else you're fired, right? That's a knee-jerk reaction, and I hear it and I see it and I validate your feelings. They are absolutely real and I like it. But unpopular opinion perhaps here is that I don't think you should. And there's a variety of reasons why I don't think you should. One, the market's not trending that way. All my colleagues, all the lawyers are saying, don't make it mandatory. And there's a reason that most of us are saying that. I'm going to break it down into three particular little areas. The first one, I'll call, did my PowerPoint disappear for you guys? Can you guys see my PowerPoint still?
No, it's gone.
Darn it. Is it there?
I did want to ask a question of why you felt it necessary to tell us you were drinking tea.
You know,
Don't answer that.
It's been a week. So nobody can see my PowerPoint. Oh dear. Okay, let's try again. Okay, now you can see it?
Yes.
Okay. Boop, 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 boop. This terribly awkward PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm going to call it the social aspect. The first reason why I don't think mandatory vaccines are a good idea is the social aspect. There are large swaths of society that feel very strongly about the word mandatory in relation to healthcare. I told this story to a couple people on here, so you guys get the repeat version, but I have a good friend who's of Indigenous descent. And, you know, when they first announced the emergency FDA approval of the vaccine, I was like, I am so in. I'm getting that vaccine as soon as it's available to me. Awesome. And she's like, cool, I guess. And I said, well, how can you not be excited? This is science. This is progress. You'll be able to see your family again. And she goes, oh, my family definitely won't be getting it. So why not? She says, you have to understand. The federal government literally experimented on me and my people for a long time in the name of science and medicine. And this is, a cultural phenomenon. It's a generational trauma for a lot of folks to be hesitant about making that decision. And I think using the word mandatory really plays to that fear. So that's, probably psychology people can do a long discussion. NPR had a great discussion on it the other day, but that's just a personal thing that I've noticed is that using the word mandatory as it relates to healthcare kind of turn a lot of people off. And that's a morale issue in your workplace. The more legal answer is liability. Now, what happens when you make something a term of employment and it goes wrong? Anyone want to yell it out? You make something a term of employment and then the vaccine gives a bad allergic reaction. What happens?
Lawsuit.
Absolutely.
Lawsuit.
When it's mandatory, it's on you. And So, okay, it's mandatory allergic reaction. My workers' comp carrier will pick that up, right? When's the last time you read your workers' comp coverage to determine whether a mandatory vaccine is covered? It may or may not be covered. I don't know, but I'd hazard a guess that it's probably not. It's not something that's contemplated, I think, very often in the workers' comp world until recently. But you may have it. If there's not comp coverage, however, it's on you again. And it could be a negligence claim. It could be, attorneys are very clever at coming up with reasons to sue. So intentional infliction of emotional distress. As the last thing you want is a lawsuit about COVID vaccines when all you were trying to do is make your workplace safe, right? So in addition to those liability matters, you have our other old friends, OSHA and the NLRA. Now, OSHA came out of a time when, it was the Industrial Revolution type of stuff, and there was all this workplace hazards. And so the rules under OSHA, in a nutshell, say that an employer has an obligation to provide a workplace that is free from harm and potential harm. And an objecting employee may have a valid claim under OSHA if they are concerned that a certain activity may exacerbate a symptom they have or lead to death. So this makes sense in its origin story. Hey, employee, that furnace is off. Go climb in that furnace and tell me why it's broken. An objecting employee says, no way I'm doing that. Employer says, you're fired. That's an OSHA claim. That applies here too, though. So you say, hey, employee, get a mandatory vaccine. They say, I think it might kill me, so I'm not going to do that. You say, no, get the vaccine. I mean, folks have some real concerns, right? It's under emergency FDA approval still, not full FDA approval. People have hearing stories about bad reactions and they go, I don't want that in my system. So if you take the step to discipline or terminate someone for refusing that vaccine in that circumstance, then you have a potential OSHA claim. The other situation is under the NLRA. I know none of you are probably unionized, and I would not recommend doing it if you're not. But when a group of individuals get together and engage in protected concerted activity, they're coming to you as a group of employees saying, us employees, we're not comfortable getting the vaccines, and you as administration or management take adverse action against those employees, it may be considered an unfair labor practice. So those are things that, you really got to train your ears to listen for those things, because they may not be the sort of, naturally occurring conversations in the workplace, but they do happen. So those are my top 3 reasons why I'm not a fan of mandatory. Now, there's going to be people who still go mandatory. It makes more sense if you do it mandatory and you're a healthcare organization, for example, or working with vulnerable populations, like in the home type of thing. So I'm not here to dispute that in particular. There is the alternative of making it mandatory for certain roles, strategically choosing to require it for certain groups and not others. So for example, it can, the organization can require a vaccination of employees whose job functions entail a lot of contact with the public or presence at a certain, easily transmissible sites. But the concern here, of course, is beware of disparate impact. You may remember disparate impact versus disparate treatment. I think we talked about it a year ago, and I'm sure everyone paid attention to that little conversation. Disparate treatment means you have groups of people. So you have Asian American, Indian American, Black Americans, and you say, I'm going to favor one group over the other. It's your intention to treat those groups differently. Disparate impact is, I'm going to make a rule or a policy that has nothing to do with their protected class status, their national origin, their race, anything like that. But the impact of your policy or rule has the impact of favoring one group or disfavoring another. So if you have a group that you want to make it a mandatory vaccine policy for, and that group may all, look the same or be of similar protected categories, that's a consideration that I think you should probably work out a little longer whether you really want to make it mandatory or not. But we can talk about it if you want. Okay. My suggestion is strongly encourage the vaccine. I think it's the better approach. And assessing where your organization at is a good idea. You, as CEO and HR professionals, you know better than anyone what kind of organization you have. What is the relationship like between administration and employees? And right now, and again, we have this time to kind of get ready. Right now, you can start assessing what percentage of employees plan on taking the vaccine. You can send out anonymous surveys. Go to SurveyMonkey, do a survey on, do you plan on taking the vaccine? If we offer an incentive, will that encourage you to take the vaccine? Things like that. How many people do you estimate will need an accommodation? You may already have a sense of that from your history as is. And then once you get kind of an idea, you'll know. I mean, if you're at 80% of your employees are saying, yep, I'm going to get the vaccine on my own, I don't need any encouragement, you're looking really good, right? Why even bother thinking any further about, should we make it mandatory? Should we incentivize? 80% is fantastic. If you're at a much lower rate, then maybe you do start thinking about things like incentives. When we talk about incentives, however, there is a bit of a danger if you have an employer-sponsored wellness plan. I don't know how many of you do, if any of you do, but you know if you do, you know who you are. With employer-sponsored wellness plans, we come back to that umbrella of the Americans with Disability Act, so be careful with that. The big thing here is to limit the incentives in that situation. So I recommend that overall anyway, is to not be so lofty with your incentives. There was a hospital in Texas that offered $500 to each employee who got the vaccine. That's a lot of money. Depending on your organization, you're going to be out a lot of money. But something like a $50 gift card, a hydro flask bottle with your company logo on it, those are great incentives that maybe give a little bit of an extra nudge. Sometimes they don't. Some psychologists say that by incentivizing it, you're making it look like, well, I have to be talked into this decision, don't I? Because it's not a good idea otherwise. And to avoid any, potential claims of discrimination against those who do not get the incentive, you can open it up to everybody. And what I mean by that is the folks who ask for religious accommodation or disability related accommodation who would not be eligible to get the incentive if they're not getting the vaccine. You can create other incentive opportunities, like if you get tested once a week with a nose swab, then you'd also be eligible for the incentive. Okay. Strongly encouraging is the approach that most employers are taking at this point. So, furthering, how do we maximize participation? How do we maximize our vaccination rates? Always a good idea to make a plan or a policy. What do plans or policies do? It makes it clear to employees what our expectations are, why we're doing things the way that we're doing. You can make it really kind of an educational experience or a company call to action where you encourage all the employees to take the vaccine, get the incentive, and you're a hero now. And of course, providing information to all your employees on the exceptions, the accommodations. I always think that's a good idea because, all of us sitting here have a pretty good understanding about asking for accommodation. Oh, this is a normal part of the employment process. But if you happen to have staff who are younger or inexperienced in these things, they probably have no idea that it's even out there, and they tend to keep their concerns to themselves. And so having a conversation with folks or saying, if you have any religious or disability accommodations, please come talk to us. Those are good ideas in this situation. You could provide a series of trainings, learning tools, conflict resolution in the workplace about COVID conflict, or we can come up with fun names like that, why it has a negative impact on the workplace. Watch the trends, of course. Trends are important in this because things have changed so quickly. I know I'm not the only one who feels that way, but I swear every day I wake up and there's a new rule or a new law or a new proposed rulemaking authority. And that's maybe a little too lawyer nerdish, but it's like, oh, I thought we were doing everything right and now it's changed again. So following the trends and being open to course correction here is really, really important. Consider the changes in the external environment, like how vaccinations are happening in the industry, in the economy. Consider changes in the scientific or technological spheres and legal developments. Consider the changes in your internal climate. How are people engaging with you once you've implemented a vaccine policy? Has it changed your retention or your talent acquisition, your challenges or employees' behaviors? Those things are important to pay attention to because of the earlier issues, right? The morale and the social aspect, the liability, OSHA, protected concerted activity concerns. And of course, we have the employees who will keep working remotely potentially. They may not be a priority for the vaccines, but they should be considered as part of your plan as well. One great way to encourage people to get the vaccine is to cover the time that they're doing it. People love that. If you're making it mandatory, you're on the hook, right? You know that you have to cover the time it takes and cover the cost, if any. If you're making it voluntary, you don't have to, but certainly you're making it more accessible and easier for folks to access. If you're saying, we'll pay for, the 4 hours that it takes to get the vaccine. I have no idea how long it takes. Some people may have a longer process than others. Some people may not have a car and may commute to work via bus. And so asking them to leave work to go get a vaccine is quite an endeavor. So you can consider covering the cost of the Uber there as well. Anything that would incentivize or encourage folks or make it easier for them to make this decision, I think is a plus. Okay, and the very important question, what do we do if an employee won't get vaccinated? Well, the good news is probably most of you are going to choose a voluntary approach because you don't want to get sued. So we may not have to worry too much about, do we fire them or whatnot? But I would ask why. And that goes back to my earlier point about the young person who doesn't know they can ask for an accommodation. Why don't you want to get a vaccine? Oh, well, I have lupus and it's just something I'm really, my doctor always says I should be wary of that. You go, aha, fill out this form. That's a disability accommodation. Other folks might just be fearful, might be nervous, and that might be targeted by your plan or your educational series or your incentives. But asking why, I think, creates that conversation about what can we do to make this better? What can we do as an employer to encourage you? You're going to keep your current protocols in place, the safety measures and all that. Those things I would not get rid of anytime soon. Probably the vast majority of you here created a COVID policy, healthy return to workplace policy that Nonprofits First built a model for, or just, in the office, we wear masks, we socially distance, things like that. Keep that policy in place because there will be people who choose not to get vaccinated either because of an accommodation or because they just don't want to. So having that current protocol and safety measure in place keeps your office place safe, keeps you in compliance with the OSHA requirement to have a workplace that's free from potential harm and hazards, and also is reassuring for folks. And if it becomes mandatory and it is a term of employment, yes, you may terminate them. You may discipline them and terminate them if it is a term of employment and they do not go through with it. Think very carefully before making that decision. It's challenging times in the legal realm as much as it is in every other realm. So I have no idea what to expect out of the EEOC for further guidance under the ADA. The anti-discrimination provisions is all coming at us so quickly. So I would say that's probably not the place I would start if I were you. But if you do that, make sure to consult with your attorney before making any termination decisions. So I ran through that because I thought there'd be a lot of questions. So we've arrived at that point.
I have a question. I have two questions, Vanessa.
Mhm.
If you don't make it mandatory, which had been my first gut reaction, but then my insurance agent said, no, you should, because if you don't, and someone gets sick, gets it from another staff member who didn't get vaccinated because you didn't make it mandatory, that makes us liable also. So that was one question. So he was saying make it mandatory, but don't enforce it, which really didn't make any sense whatsoever to me.
I don't like this insurance agent already.
that advice was like, that didn't make sense. So that was the one thing. Do we become liable if someone gets sick because we did not make it mandatory? And the other one is I just want to be clear on, if we ask people to go to a CVS or to go to a Walgreens to get the vaccine off-site, we don't fall under that ADA umbrella. But if we had Walgreens come in here and do it for us here, then we would.
If you have a contract with them. And the thing about entering into contract is sometimes, you might have a vaccine bus that pulls up and you go, hey, everybody go outside at CVS if you want. Did you enter into a contract to do that? I don't know. But if you're asking an entity to come do something on your behalf, that's you, right? If they just happen to be a CVS bus outside and you send an email saying, if anyone's interested, you can go outside for your vaccine, we'll cover the cost. That's different. Okay. To your insurance agent, I don't know if that was your healthcare coverage or your liability insurance agent.
Liability.
It's my understanding right now that businesses are not getting sued if people contract at work. That's usually would fall under a workers' comp right away, and workers' comp is saying, we're not really doing that either. Kind of like mold. It's almost impossible to prove. Did the mold originate here? Did your respiratory illness start because of the mold at work? Who knows if you legitimately got COVID from a coworker or if you got it from the Publix cashier. I absolutely hate an idea about having a policy and not enforcing it.
I was not going to follow that advice. That didn't make any sense whatsoever.
Terrible advice to not follow policies. Right. I like the idea of strongly encouraging, because you could still go, our guiding principle is the health and safety of our workplace. And with that in mind, we would like to encourage everyone to go get a vaccine. It is important. The strong language, you can write, to your employees using strong language about how important it is. You will not be in trouble for a person having COVID in the workplace and spreading it if the other policies you have in place are being enforced. That's why the mask mandate in place, the social distancing. Yeah. And so you likely came up with a very clever solution to that many months ago, saying, we're going to have staggered shifts. We're going to have one-way hallways, no congregating in common areas. And I'm sure you've been enforcing it all along. You've not seen someone's mouth or nose for months because they all have their masks on religiously. If you're doing that, then that's all you really need to do.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, Vanessa. So if we do opt to pay for the time the employee goes to get their vaccine, and then they have a reaction to the vaccine, is that then a workers' comp issue?
No.
Because they were on the clock.
Right. If you mandate it and it is a term of employment, and you sent them and you then said, I'm going to pay for that time or flex time, it's probably not going to be covered under workers' comp.
What if it's not mandated, but we just offered to cover the time? You had mentioned that.
I don't think workers' comp is going to cover it still, just because I think workers' comp is kind of backing. Again, it's too kind of tenuous, the connection. That was my son sneezing. So I don't think that that's going to happen. I do think it would be a good idea in that situation to come up with a way to, help someone with that time. We still have Families First Coronavirus Response Act. I'm not sure if that's going to be updated to include things like this. With the Biden administration, are they going to extend it and make it mandatory again? It's possible that might be something that rolls out. I don't know, but I would certainly offer people, sick time, maybe let them go into the negative if they don't have anything, if that's the case. Sounds like most people who get it are having pretty good outcomes. So hopefully nobody gets really ill.
So I have a question, Vanessa. This may sound a little strange, but if you were to offer somebody $100 to get to get the vaccine, and a group of people said they don't want to get the vaccine, could they claim discrimination that the other people got the $100 and they didn't?
Everyone can claim discrimination at any time, I found. So it's possible. And so that's why I like the idea of taking some time to really look at what does your organization look like? Who's interested in this? And like I mentioned with the disparate impact or disparate treatment thing, if you find that only people of one protected category are the ones that are resistant, you may want to consider opening an incentive for other reasons as well to avoid looking discriminatory. You don't want to be discriminatory, and so it would never be your intention, and sometimes it just happens anyway. So if you could find an alternative to the vaccination that you can live with, and I don't know exactly what that will look like. The only thing I came up with so far is getting swabbed regularly or something like that. I think that would really help protect against any potential feelings of discrimination. Even if it's not a claim, we still don't want employees to have feelings of being treated differently.
Vanessa, it's Mark.
Mark.
Just one thing on the question about liability. I actually talked to a personal injury attorney about that, and they were saying how they just have no way of bringing a case of COVID, even like in a healthcare facility, because it is just still so hard to prove as to where it came from. My question though is with our clients and with our families, and perhaps with our donors, who, like a client might say, does my care manager have the vaccine? Because if not, I don't want to be seen by that care manager. In our group homes, in our residential program, we have families that pay the bills for the residents of the program, and they're asking us, well, everyone's going to get the vaccine, correct? You're going to mandate that, correct? And we don't really want to do that. We're in agreement with you, but we are, we're struggling a little bit as to be able to come up with those answers to be able to satisfy our clients that even though so-and-so didn't get the vaccine, that we're still running a safe, a program that's safe for you to be seen by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's tricky because it involves not just the dealing with your employees' feelings about it, but you're dealing with your clients' feelings and the families of the clients' feelings. And there's a lot of feelings when you bring all those people into the conversation. I think I might focus on one, trying to strongly encourage your employees to get it, right? Talk to them, figure out if they're willing, if they're able to. And two, reminding the families that even if someone's not vaccinated yet, you still take all XYZ measures to make sure that their safety. And so while it's a limited resource, we're doing everything we can to protect your family, you and your family member, including using masks, washing hands constantly, doing this, whatever you're doing. And maybe refocus on that. And I mean, I want everyone to get vaccinated. I truly do. And so I hope your employees do. I just don't want you to, find yourself facing some difficult situation because of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a point, right, when enough people in the community and will get the vaccination, right, and the rate of contracting COVID will drop from where we are to probably something more like the common flu, the one that we're used to getting, right? And we don't. I mean, I don't know, if anybody here does, mandate a flu shot for our employees, right? It's going to become that, the same kind of death rates once enough people have the COVID shot, right? That might not be till who knows when, August, September, October, but that's what we're really aiming for, right? Is to, because I don't think we're eliminating this, we're getting it to just some more acceptable rate of death in our community. Yeah.
Right. So if you have a lot of employees who get the vaccine, that's why I think great, fantastic. You're on the right path. Not everyone has to get it for you to be, laser focused on your goal, as Biden would say. So you're going to have people saying no. You're going to have pushback regardless. If you can just encourage participation as much as possible and remind the people that are around that even with vaccines, we're still following all the safety measures we have in place. That might help with your particular matter.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Vanessa, do you know of any case law out there right now for either organizations or communities or municipalities that aren't following CDC guidelines, which is our community, that where somebody's been sued for not following CDC guidelines?
Off the top of my head, I mean, it comes across, lawyer blogs once in a while, but I don't have case law memorized for that. Something to do research on. If you and other members are interested, I could try to pull some stuff.
Don't. I was just curious. I was just curious.
No, I mean, it's an interesting cause of action, and
I'm
I
curious,
think that's why
has anyone had?
Go ahead.
Has anyone had the health department come and do a check? I've seen at businesses where they have that posted on their door that they were checked. Has anybody had that happen at their nonprofit?
Not that I'm aware of, but you guys can answer for yourself. Sounds like no, nobody's talking. I think a lot of nonprofits are just office buildings a lot of the time, maybe some folks have more, but a lot of us are just probably not the target of the health department compared to other places that may be more of a super spreader venue.
I've been in touch with the, sorry.
Go ahead, Ellen.
I've been in touch with the health department probably 4 to 5 times a day because of the population that we serve. And as long as you follow their guidelines, they are extremely supportive. And I think that that's a way to say that the policies and procedures that you're following are based on the guidelines and the direction given by the health department. They also share in writing via email any of the communications that we have. So I think that's probably really good backup for, to cover us in that way.
No, that's fantastic.
I was just going to say, I think for us, the hardest part, Karis, has been getting clients and residents. I don't know, Pam, if you guys or anybody else that runs residential programs has been having that problem, but people refusing to quarantine, and then us having to get the health department involved in that. It's just been, we're dealing with behavioral health issues. We're dealing with people that can't understand why they have to quarantine. And so that's been our biggest struggle. But I will tell you, the health department has been very helpful when we've had to call them on that. So.
To address that, Diana, we have worked with the health department we've only had one person in our shelter who was COVID positive, and she had no symptoms. She got tested because a coworker at her workplace was positive. So she quarantined off-site with no problem. We have very strict policies if you come into the shelter. We have a quarantine apartment where we want you to be for 2 weeks. And so if somebody doesn't want to do that, then they don't come in. So we are being very assertive with our wonderful policies that were crafted in large part with help from the health department. We have also started to utilize a hotel for our overflow since we decreased our capacity substantial in order to do social distancing. The other best thing that we did, although it cost us some money, we put TVs in every single bedroom. So that decreased the tendency to spend time in a communal area. And so
great idea.
We've done that, and we've also we have prepared meals brought in.
Yeah, we get that. Yeah.
So we do that, and that too has cut down on the kitchen sharing. So feel like we've been very fortunate. Somebody recently asked us, one of our staff members asked about, can we start requiring employees to get tested routinely? so that they can be pretty assured that their colleagues are not COVID positive. We haven't required anything, but we opted to do the leave time, the optional leave time, in addition to generous leave time that we already have. So and for employees to take time off for COVID related time. But yeah, does anybody else do like mandatory testing? Maybe not like on site, but requiring routine tests. Yeah, we have not, but and it probably just the one employee who's a little worried. But they've been really good about masks and staying 6 feet apart.
That's good. I mean, you can require entry to be subject to a negative COVID test. I think it gets a bit unruly when you have to do it every week, particularly with other safety measures in place. And, folks respond to that. And again, you have however many people you're working with and their various thoughts and feelings and backgrounds and traumas that all come into play when people are telling them, you're not allowed to come here unless you do X, Y, and Z. So at the end of the day, you're the CEO. You can make the rules about these things. And if you want COVID testing once a week from your employees, you can. It just may not be too practical for your organization in the long term. Hopefully soon we'll have tests that, we could do ourselves in the workplace, or people can do them at home. And then, that's a different ball game, right? Like, how great will that be? We can all test ourselves constantly in our free time. If we require COVID testing, do we have to pay for it for employees? Well, I mean, it's free. Like the health department does it for free, and most insurances, if you have insurance, not most, if you have insurance, it's covered by the insurance. The only cost that can be associated with COVID testing, I believe, is like a copay. So if they go to a private doctor, there may be a copay. I would encourage people to go to the health department, the Fit Ballpark, or whatever that place is called, Fit Team Ballpark, and get it done there, or one of the various clinics around that do it. And that way there's a guarantee that there's no cost. Other questions?
But Vanessa, when we got lucky about 2 weeks ago when there was a batch of vaccines through the health department that we were invited to bring some people to, and we were told, it was over 65. That was like one of the rules we were told by the health department, and our employees and clients that were over 65 to that they were limiting us to bring there. I had like donors and board members say to me, "Why not us?" And of course, you're probably aware there was a situation at the Morse Life facility where they did apparently fly in people, donors, and board members to participate. I'm just wondering what the whole, and the Morse Life situation may be different because they were given vaccines for a particular purpose. But is there, with us prioritizing in that form, is there anything for us to be concerned about? With why again they didn't give us enough for all of our over 65. They just gave us enough for some of our 65, so we had to make some choices.
And so you prioritized employees and clients over donors and board members?
Yes, but even among employees, we didn't have enough for all of our employees. We just had to. And we also had a very short window to be able to do it as well. So you might have gotten a call, and if you didn't call us back fast enough, we were on to the next person.
Well, with a system of first come, first serve, you're unlikely to run into potential discrimination claims, because unless you were saying, we're going to only call these people first and leave these ones to the last and then see how that goes. But I'm sure you didn't. So I don't think that would present any problems for you. And, like, there's not a lot of vaccines. There's very little you can do about
Yeah.
saying some people got it and some people didn't. I certainly would prioritize clients and employees over donors and board members, though, because they interact, right? Like the clients are probably more at risk, or vulnerable populations, or may have health issues, and then the people who are working with them are going to be exposing them to whatever they have. So that would be absolutely reasonable in my mind.
So Mark, I can tell you that we had this conversation because what we saw with Morse Life, and we made the decision, even if we had extra, we would not open it up to the donors. That was even before Morse, because we got phone calls early on saying, if you get from donors saying, could we get into your, vaccine? And we said, no, you have to go to your own primary. We kept that very black and white, that board members, donors, the only people we're gonna pay to get vaccine would be clients and staff, and that's it.
There's probably
clean.
a lot of people just trying to cut ahead of the line in some
There are.
circumstances, and that's not our burden to help everybody, right? So sounds like you made a good choice.
Yeah. I mean, we even didn't we have an over 65 employee who has an over 65 spouse, and they wanted to bring their spouse, and we said no. We're vaccinating our employees and clients. That was a hard thing to tell them. I'm only vaccinating you. Only so many.
Any other questions?
Well, in the not too distant future, then there'll be more vaccines out there. But right now, you kind of have to be circumspect with your organization's participation in that.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Renee got off. She has a migraine, and Michelle asked me to end things for us. And I wanted to, Vanessa, we consider you so important to what we do, and we are forever grateful for how many, every time we ask you for coming and giving us great information. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. That's very kind of you to say. I love coming here. You guys are a blast to talk to, honestly.
And before we wind up, just 3 announcements. One, for those of you who put in legislative advocacy issues, we did not get a lot this year because of everybody being so busy and occupied. So what we did was we put together a very strong letter and included all of your priorities and sent it to our legislative delegation and the executive director, just to let them know, because of the huge deficit this year, that nonprofits are going to have issues and need, funds more than ever in the coming year. Also, the board decided to take a stand with the city of West Palm Beach over its plan to quote unquote arrest homeless people. So we're sending, Diana had done a beautiful op-ed piece. So we're going to send individual letters to each of the city commissioners. They're going to be discussing it again. It was supposed to be this month, but I think it's going to be next month. So just so you know, that'll be on all of our behalf. And then lastly, in last November, I sent out emails. I'm going to send it again. We know that a lot of HR directors and development directors would like to be in touch with each other, just like we are, to share information. So we're setting up individual groups for them to meet, and Vanessa has agreed to be part of the HR group. So I'm going to send it out again, and if you haven't signed up or asked your HR development director if they'd like to be part of this, please do so. Send me an RSVP after I send this out with the name and contact information. And we'll be setting those up probably now that it's mid-January, starting in February. And we're going to let them do the leading, after the first meeting to decide what they want to talk about and pick a different facilitator for each meeting. So if you have any questions, I'll send out the email tomorrow. And, we have like 10 in each of those groups so far, but we think it would be very valuable. So on that note, thank you all for coming. This is one of the largest groups we've ever had. We have 44 people. And so we obviously picked a topic that all of you really wanted to know about. And on behalf of Michelle and her committee, if you have other topics that you would like discussed in these meetings, it's all about you. It's not us. So we would really like you to decide. So please send me any suggestions and I'll get them to Michelle. Any other final comments from board members or anybody?
Just wondering if Diana observed anything during the gallery view that you wanted to share with us, Diana.
The gallery view was a bit quiet. I'm very proud of my colleagues. There was no burping going on, but next time we'll have to make sure we got a little bit of sound effects just to keep the ball rolling. So don't forget, guys, to reach out to one another too. And as Ruth Majeria always says to us, Ruth, what do you say? You end with our passing reminder.
Just a reminder to take care of you, that it's so important to take care of us. And I think as I was listening at the very beginning, all of us are, and I'm there too, are feeling overwhelmed and just wondering whether we have what it takes to keep us going. So I want to encourage us to take care of us.
So self-care, my friends, self-care. All right, see you all next month, if not sooner. Thanks, Vanessa. Great job. Great job. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Be safe. God bless you.